What's it been like to you watching this play out on social media? Like, I've seen a lot of misinformation. I've seen videos like, look how awesome this video is. It's from 2014. The NPR had a thread. Maybe I'll try and find it and share it. Was like, here's all the things that have been going viral that are completely false.
I just think it's disastrous for our mental health that we're watching a war play out on social media.
A real like large scale war.
Yeah,
right?
and I think for young people in particular, like it really shakes your foundation because you think to yourself, hey, I live in a city. Oh, look, I'm seeing these people like fleeing for their lives. I'm seeing apartment buildings getting shelled. I'm seeing
people making their own
Molotov
tanks
cocktails. Just roll into town. I'm seeing civilians just
Russia surround the capital city, whoever it is. Yeah.
It's like I think it's just terrible for everyone's mental health and well-being on a level that I can't recall. Like I'm remembering when folks were watching TV in the 90s during the Gulf War and Gulf War II. Social media was not to this level, and you didn't have folks just broadcasting what was going on in those locations. This week on Forward, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how it could play out, best case scenarios, economic and political impact here in the US this week on Forward.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. It is it's been a tough time, I think, for most everyone because I don't know about you, Zach, but like every day you wake up and then you go to your phone and be like, what is going on in Ukraine?
Watching this play out on social media is fascinating is the word I'm going to use, but not in a good way. Like
it's engrossing.
Yeah. A lot of negative energy.
It's debilitating.
Thoughts on what you're seeing? What you're not seeing, what you're wading through every day. What are your high-level thoughts, Andrew?
I'm really heartened by the relatively unified response out of the West. These stories of, for example, Poland giving fighter jets to Ukrainian pilots who essentially get in the plane and then just are able to take off because they're Russian-made models that Ukrainian pilots are more or less familiar with. That image really struck me. Where like you're bringing fighter planes and they're just like able to take off in them and go fight. The appeal by President Zelensky saying, "Hey, anyone who wants to come fight with us, we'll give you weapons."
Like him, like legit hunkering down and bearing arms and fighting.
Yeah, it's been one of the most inspirational things that I can remember. So Zelensky is by background a TV actor who played a president in a sitcom.
A bit of a comedy, right?
Yeah. So it would be the equivalent of, I'm going to say, Tom Hanks becoming president here in the U.S.
I was going to say Julie what's her name? Julia
Louis-Dreyfus.
Louis-Dreyfus, where she literally played a president.
Well, she played a vice presidential candidate. I think
Did she eventually get VP in the series? Anyway.
She was mainly a VP and then became president for like a half minute.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not sure if Tom Hanks played a president, but I'm thinking about Tom Hanks in the 80s when he was a comic actor.
Which I was thinking Kevin Spacey, maybe.
And then he went serious. You could say Kevin Kline from Dave.
Oh, yeah. But it has to be a comedy. And like, honestly, it's a really good strategy because Americans, one of the hardest parts of getting elected president, and we dealt with this, was can Americans visualize and see you as their president?
Well, this is one of the darker elements of contemporary life, but there is so much performance involved in being a political figure at this point.
Yeah.
Where if you can get in front of a TV camera and give a compelling speech off of a teleprompter, that actually is a very important skill.
It's a qualifier. Yeah. You're qualified for the job.
Yes.
Oddly.
And so would a world-class actor be excellent at that? 100% yes.
Which is funny because some of the best operators in the world today, let's call it, I'm going to use the term best. I'm going to say top earners and entrepreneurs. Let's call it Zuckerbergs or Elon Musk or that sort of thing, would probably be horrible in those environments.
Yeah, sure. They're not performers in that way.
And that's, we have had whole podcasts on this in some ways. Anyway, Zelensky was a comedian president and is now the real president.
And that is now the real president, but there were a couple of ways it could go. And the way it went is that Zelensky has hunkered down and said, this is my country. I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Let's greet them with Molotov cocktails. Like, the whole thing has been extraordinary and has highlighted I think he has legitimately shamed the West into helping. Because he's willing to sacrifice so much. His countrymen and women are sacrificing so much that you're like, okay, like, we have to get with the program and help this country, help this man. It's been one of the most singular things I've ever recalled. And I think he single-handedly turned the world's sentiment in a particular direction.
Yes.
So the sanctions have gone up and up and up. To the point where it feels like every day this conflict goes on is a punishing day for the Russian economy, for Putin. The ruble has crashed against the dollar. Apparently about half of their foreign reserves are off limits to them. There's at least one Russian bank that's reported to be on the verge of failure. So it's clear to me that that Putin expected it to be easier and faster. I think he expected Crimea, the sequel, and it is not. And so now every day seems to matter. So heartened by the Western unified response, heartened by the cost it's imposing on Russia, the pressure, the single biggest variable now is whether Putin's a rational actor. And there is an increasing concern that he's not as rational as you'd hope. He's 70 years old. He's been in power for 2 decades plus. He's ruled with an iron fist. He doesn't have a whole lot of checks and balances going on. He's surrounded by folks who are probably deathly afraid of him. And so as this conflict escalates, the major question is, as the cost goes up, will his better instincts prevail, where he says, look, this cost is terrible in terms of the economy, lives of Russian soldiers, to the extent that matters to him. And does he say, okay, we'll take the eastern separatist parts of Ukraine, call it victory, withdraw, and then go back and hope that the West rescinds these sanctions and we go back to something approaching normality? Or does he say, okay, we're going to elevate this to a point where there's no restraint in terms of bombarding civilian buildings and cities in Ukraine? Because you know that there is a level of restraint. Unfortunately, it was reported that they used at least one of these vacuum bombs that causes massive harm. But you know that Russia has the whole spectrum all the way up to nuclear weapons. It's remarkable to me how much hinges upon the mentality and rationality of one human. But here we are. It's 2022, and just about everything you do is made just for you, with the possible exception for most people still of your coffee, despite the fact that you really have strong feelings about your coffee. Let's change that right now. Go to Trade Coffee and take a coffee quiz to get started. They will send you your first bag made just for you, and if you don't love it, they will replace it for free. It's a coffee subscription with no hassle. Change your frequency. You can modify it or even cancel it at any time. And for our listeners right now, Trade Coffee is offering you a total of $20 off your first 3 bags when you go to drinktrade.com/yang. To get started, take their quiz at drinktrade.com/yang and start your journey to your perfect cup of coffee. That's drinktrade.com/yang. for $20 off your first 3 bags. You'll be glad you did.
Right now, like where we are today is obviously Russia has invaded Ukraine. It's not going fast, let's put it that way. Like the information's flying sideways. We have no idea what Putin's actual mentality and timeline was, but it seems to be slow. And the West, this has united the West. particularly the EU. So you're seeing a couple things. So the EU accepted Ukraine's application to join, which they hadn't before, which is really an economic thing and not a military thing. But they're giving them $500 million in aid for their military. I'm quoting a Politico Instagram post, which is actually pretty good. The EU will be shutting down its airspace to Russian flights and putting a ban on their Kremlin media machine. Germany is halting their Nord Stream 2 energy pipeline with Moscow, so they're getting crushed on that type of stuff. The U.S. is hunting down any rich Russian in the U.S., it appears. They're going after, the quote was, they're going after, this is from the White House or Biden administration senior official, we're going after their yachts, their luxury apartments, their money, and their ability to send their kids to fancy schools in the West, which is probably a very interesting or effective tactic, potentially. They're targeting Putin's personal assets in the U.S. and in Europe, which is apparently billions in wealth. And my favorite one was BP was just getting rid of its 20% stake in Rosneft. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's a state-controlled oil producer, which is billions of dollars. They're just, fuck you, Putin, fuck everything. So the strategy here is Russia goes in with bombs and guns and planes and trying to take this over. Ukraine says this is our home, fuck you. And the international community is now just trying to squeeze them out sanction-wise. Do you think Putin gives a shit about sanctions?
Yeah, I think he does.
Really?
I think he expected to be sanctioned, but I think he's being surprised by the severity and unanimity and breadth of these sanctions. And I think it was easier for him before the fact to say, okay, they'll sanction me, it won't be so bad.
Because we have kind of sanctioned him before, right? And have been far weaker.
But it seems the harm and the pain are deeper and more severe than I believe that he saw coming. And he may or may not care about the fortunes of other oligarchs who've lost. I think I saw a number where they've lost, 40 billion, 80 billion, like whatever the number is.
Yep.
Collectively, a lot of these Russian companies are globally listed,
Yep.
and they're getting crushed. So to the extent that he has a circle around him, that circle is saying to him, hey, this is painful and please make it stop.
Yep.
Now, it could be that he doesn't actually hear those figures or care, but I don't think he anticipated the severity. And one big sign of that is that he saber rattled the other day where he said, hey, these sanctions are above and beyond, and I will threaten, essentially nuclear deterrence, which, by the way, makes zero sense. It's like, you cut off my banking system and I nuke you. And I'm happy to say that no one took it seriously. But it showed that these were not things that he anticipated and was taking in stride.
I mean, look, I think we are all shocked by the sanctions, and I think the European Union was probably shocked that they were able to get everybody together and that sort of get aligned, right? This. This brings me to my second question, though. Do you think Putin is a rational actor?
Yeah, no, you hope so, but there are some indications that he might not be as lucid as you'd hope.
Yeah. I don't see any real evidence that he is. Like, the whole thing is irrational. It's a Hitler-type mentality, it appears.
This whole thing strikes one as deeply irrational.
Yeah.
I think that there's been a wholesale miscalculation on his part around the nature of the welcome or resistance he'd receive in Ukraine. I think he talked himself into the fact that people would maybe not be happy to see him, but certainly wouldn't be fighting tooth and nail.
Right.
And that they'd be able to take the capital relatively quickly. And so that's just, you delude yourself. So I think he fooled himself on that score. And now that he's getting all this evidence that it's not working out that way, the question is, does he double down or does he rethink and pull back?
So this is where I want to go. I think we're having fun with this. So when we ran for president, you wrote your book, and a lot of the stuff even with Forward Party, a lot of stuff you're doing, it's really can tie back to one of the main principles, but a main principle that everything we do revolves around the almighty dollar, right? And we've thought about that, it's literally been God to the vast majority, definitely the West, but most of the world and most people. And my interesting thought, I'm curious what you think, is that it feels like we actually hit its limit. In that, what I talk about BP pulling out of a deal, they're going to lose billions of dollars. right now the stock market, like you're not investing, you're not touching Russian. If you're a hedge fund, you're not touching Russian companies if you can get out of your investments, right? You're dealing with backlash and supporting that. You go, Visa is out of Russia, like Apple Pay, all of that, right? So it seems like this almighty dollar has a point until you hit good or evil. And Bill Ackman, hedge fund guy, who liked you, if I recall, smart guy, he put out a massive Twitter thread saying, basically calling Joe Biden to go to war and send troops there. And which, he didn't have kids at military age. He's not going to put up arms. So I don't love that. But he did make some good points. And one of the points he made was that this is not a money war. This is a just war. This is a good versus evil war. Do you agree with that? And is that changing our almighty dollar calculus?
So first, the biggest indication of the almighty dollar ruling your institutions, I would argue, is China's relationship with Hollywood, with the NBA, where no one can speak ill of China. You remember that John Cena apology and whatnot? It's like China has such a huge market and is such a big revenue driver for some of our biggest entertainment.
Right. And that's about money, not morals. I mean, it is about morals, but
no, it's about money. I think everyone knows that. It's just like, look, big market, sure. So let's sand down any criticism.
Like, we don't mind your human rights violations as long as you stay in your borders, in your own bubble. But as soon as you start fucking with others on a massive scale, we mind. I don't know. Like outside your borders, I don't know.
So there is this market driven mentality. And I think one of the reasons why Russia's invasion of Ukraine is setting everyone off is because it's so highly irrational and value destructive. And so you're taking that value destruction and you're having Russia internalize it. The fact that there's my instinct generally is that the U.S. should be doing everything in its power to help Ukraine. In part because of the rationale that this is an entirely unjustified, irrational war
from a superpower,
and that if you are the United States, this is the clearest moral imperative I have seen in terms of having a democracy getting attacked by a hostile aggressor in a way that's really stark. And this is from a guy who, thinks military interventions are the absolute last resort. But I think that there is a lot of compelling reason for us to see this as something that's core to a world order that benefits the United States of America. If you had to put like a value on it, it's kind of incalculable. That if that world order disintegrates, then a lot of stuff goes away. And the world, like it or not, kind of relies upon the U.S. to maintain that order. It's an order that the U.S. is one of the biggest beneficiaries of.
Yep.
A lot of people benefit from it. And if you have something like this invasion go unchecked, now, right now you could very clearly argue it's like, look, the U.S. is doing a lot of stuff to put pressure on Russia, but the entire time I felt like Russia was capitalizing on American disunity and weakness. I'm very glad that it seems to have rallied the West and revitalized NATO. In terms of global unity, it has been remarkable, and maybe since 9/11. But one of the interesting things is that I think most all Americans now are like, we stand with Ukraine. Russia, terrible, Putin,
the
evil.
Ones I follow a bunch of far right and far left accounts, and there's some on the far right that are thinking Russia's not the only bad guy,
but it's such a lame. They seem very marginal.
Yeah.
The big question is whether there would be appetite for American military action or intervention, and the polling I've seen on that is that the majority of Americans think that sanctions are appropriate, but sending troops is not.
It appears we have not gone and sent troops because he's got nuclear bombs, and we don't think he's rational. So sending troops would be an act of war against Russia, and they could justify to their people that someone's coming after them. And then once you start one nuclear bomb, it's a domino effect, and it's awful. Do you agree with that? I'm assuming that's our biggest deterrence from trying to fight the guy.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me, and Alexander Vindman made this case, is that before the fact, if you, let's say, did have a handful of American troops in Ukraine, then that's like a deterrent the other direction. It's like, look, if you attack Ukraine, which, by the way, before Putin attacked Ukraine, most people thought there's no way he's crazy enough to actually invade. So if you had American troops there and
It's
American troops get killed
against us,
there's an active war against us. And by the way, that's like a pretty effective deterrent in my mind. And then so that was to me, like, a step that maybe could have been considered before the fact, though that's kind of revisionist now.
Mm-hmm.
So now it seems like we'd be escalating things. Like you want to not be necessarily the person who's responsible for the escalation, and now would be perceived as an escalation if we went that direction. Whereas before, Russia obviously has been the clear aggressor. So at this point, I think that trying to max out non-military punishments seems like the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think seizing assets of oligarchs and of Putin, totally appropriate.
Right. What breaks my heart, and I know this is like the emotional side of this, at least for me, is that Ukraine's getting, like, even though they're holding the fort in a way and doing way better than expected, they're getting bum rushed, right? They're getting blown out of, like, their whole way of life is ruined, or being sent back centuries. They've got military presence in their streets. There's violence. People are dying, right? And we, the world, are just watching. Now we're doing things, right? We are making it harder for Russia to do what they're doing. We're taking away their resources to make it more challenging or impossible to do certain things. But we're not actually taking up a fucking sword or gun and fighting. And I hate that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's a bad feeling.
It feels awful.
It feels awful.
And it's because we're scared. I think the answer is only to me is that we're scared of them. Like, we're scared that they nuke somebody without rationality and we can't stop it. Which is something we maybe never really thought about before when it came to this mutually assured destruction from nuclears. It's like, oh yeah, like, well, I can't stop you from doing like this level of bad stuff because you could do that level of bad. So I'm gonna let it go to a certain point.
What's funny is, like, I initially thought that the U.S. could intervene through conventional means.
Yeah.
And essentially just like, look, no one's crazy enough to nuke anyone, right? So even if, like, I send some planes and send some troops and send some support, like, that's not nuke worthy, like, like where, like I imagine that there might be a level of restraint on both sides, because especially, if it's the US and Russia, then you clearly...
Putin's not a rational actor, so we don't really know.
You know what I love to do that you love to do? Sleep. Yep, you do it. 8 hours a day if you're lucky, and yet you might not have invested properly in that mattress that you freaking snuggle up to every single night. Why not have a mattress that's made just for you? It's personalized to the way you want to sleep, your body type, your sleep preferences. Everyone is unique. Do you like it hot? Do you like it cool? Do you like it soft? Do you like it firm? Heck, I don't want to know, but you know who does want to know? Helix. Helix Sleep is going to send you the best mattress of your life. They were awarded the #1 best overall mattress pick of 2020 by GQ and Wired magazine. Just go to helixsleep.com/yang and take their 2-minute sleep quiz, and they'll match you to a customized mattress that will give you the best sleep of your life. With a 10-year warranty, you get to try it out for 100 nights and risk-free. Imagine trying something for 99 nights and sending it back. But they know you're not going to send it back because they have that much confidence in their mattress, and so do I. Helix is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners at helixsleep.com/yang. Best mattress around, helixsleep.com/yang.
What's it been like to you watching this play out on social media. Like I've seen a lot of misinformation. I've seen videos like, look how awesome this video is. It's from 2014. The NPR had a thread. Maybe I'll try and find it and share it. Was like, here's all the things that have been going viral that are completely false.
I just think
What have
it's
you seen?
disastrous for our mental health that we're watching a war play out on social media.
A real like large scale war.
Yeah,
right?
and I think for young people in particular, like it really shakes your foundation because you think to yourself, hey, I live in a city. Oh, look, I'm seeing these people like fleeing for their lives. I'm seeing apartment buildings getting shelled. I'm seeing
people making their own
I'm seeing
Molotov
tanks
cocktails.
just roll into town. I'm seeing civilians just
Russia surround the capital city, whoever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I think it's just terrible for everyone's mental health and well-being on a level that I can't recall. Like I'm remembering when folks were watching TV in the 90s during the Gulf War and Gulf War II. Social media was not to this level, and you didn't have folks just broadcasting what was going on in those locations.
Ooh, you're like, well, World War II, right, was the first. I mean, maybe you could argue World War I, but World War II had that fundamental evil. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it was still distant. You're reading about it via newspapers, right? Here, you're witnessing, you're fucking living that evil, right?
Yes. I'm on social media, and one of the things I don't do is I don't amplify these videos that make you feel very intensely one thing or another. Like 999 times out of 1,000, I'm like, I'm not going to amplify this because, it just makes you feel very, very strongly one emotion, whether it's horror or anger,
fear,
anxiety, or even some of the positives where it's like, look at this.
There's some beautiful stories,
or like, look at this moral actor, or look at this, so this is something that it's kind of tough for me to say, but I feel like even the positive stuff, like it's kind of like reinforcing reactivity that I don't think is very positive or healthy, where it's like pretty much if you home in on this beacon of like horrific or uplifting behavior, then you get whipsawed in various ways. Like if I'm magnifying something like super courageous and uplifting, then I feel like that person's then just going to go from there to another video that's horrifying, and then just wound up, having their emotional pendulum just get like swing back and forth.
Ukraine algorithm, yeah,
and so it's not productive or healthy. I mean, like a lot of the way I live is to think, okay, what can I do about this?
I don't know how often we talk about the podcast, but between us, we talk a lot about performative empathy. It's one thing we struggle with as, let's call it former Democrats or folks with a conscience and empathy, where it's like, there are things I can say that'll make you feel good and make me feel good and make me feel like I'm on the right team or doing the right, the things that are just or moral, right? But then there's stuff that needs to be done, which is more gritty and nitty gritty, but like, it's solving the root causes of police brutality and what we all went through with George Floyd. Like, you can say the right things, you can put the Black Lives Matter flag up, you can do all the things, but then if you actually want to solve that problem, it's complicated, it's nuanced, and so in this situation, you have a bunch of people being like, I stand with Ukraine, here's a wholesome video, donate to Save the Children or XYZ, but at the end of the day, there's very little we can actually do, because unless you're going to pick up a gun, get to Ukraine and fight, or unless you're a government official that can control money, resources, food, XYZ in Russia's world, there's nothing you can. The money's not really helping as much as we hope. I'm sure it's like on the margins, sure, but it's not a money issue realistically. Do you agree with that? Like the performance, you think it's waking people up on putting the Ukraine flag in your Twitter bio isn't really particularly helping anything, or?
Well, I think sending money is always helpful. I mean, money's real.
It's real, but
there are humanitarian things. The expressing solidarity and alignment. In this instance, probably mildly.
I guess better than nothing. I guess. I don't know.
You do want to distinguish though between expression and action, as Yuval Levin put it.
Yeah.
And so on this one, there really is one human being at the center of it all, and his name is
one fucking guy.
It's Vladimir Putin, and if there's a way that you could somehow influence what's going on in that state of mind, then for it. Other than that, try and help people at the margins. Yeah, but I do think that there's something really, really damaging about folks having these real life conflicts and images playing out in social media in the way that they are. And, unfortunately, I think this is going to be a pattern where one of the things I put in the war on normal people is that if you had a trucker convoy, was my example, and then you had conflict break out around that trucker convoy, then you'd have these images go out to millions and millions of people of some isolated atrocity, and then it would end up inflaming folks in a particular way. And that's accurate. So let's say that the Ukraine conflict goes on for months, which I guess is at least conceivable. There's going to be a recurring issue as conflicts happen, as tragedies happen. It's something that I think is terrible for the next generation's mental health, truly.
Yeah.
I'm grateful I came of age in a time before social media.
So I've now written a book, and it's coming out soon. We'll talk about it at a different time, but on the attention economy and how that's changing everything. And there's just so many things that dominate our discourse for a hot moment, and then it's as if they never happened, right? If you look back at your year or the past month or 6 months, you're like, holy crap, I was so pissed about that. And then it's just out of sight, out of mind. It's like we just go to different topics. And this one, I imagine, because it's not at home to us, it's not hitting home. To me, what's going to happen is it'll stop rating well on TV, and we'll move on to something else. The next trucker convoy, and I think that convoy is actually moving through Texas, the one that was in Canada. I think the election will happen. Biden doing something. Got the State of the Union that just happened. We haven't heard it yet, but it's we're recording this on Tuesday, but it's tonight for us. Do you think we lose? I guess maybe you're saying no one knows, but we probably start to lose attention on this, and that.
I think Ukraine remains front and center while the conflict is ongoing, and I do think that, God willing, it gets resolved in a matter of days or weeks and not months.
What does resolution look like? Putin is, like you said before, Putin declares a bullshit victory.
The best case scenario is Putin declares victory and goes back and says, "Hey, we made it safe for the separatist areas of Ukraine. Problem solved. Business as usual."
That's our best case scenario. And worst is nuclear war, right?
The worst case is nuclear conflict.
That's what's terrifying everybody.
Though I will say it would be entirely irrational for his argument to be Russia and Ukraine are one people, we are the same, and I'm going to nuke
I'm going to nuke you for disagreeing.
like that makes zero sense. One of the things I found encouraging is that Russians are standing up.
The Russian people don't like this. It's a very unpopular war everywhere, including Russia.
Last I saw, they'd arrested several thousand people for protesting. So imagine you live under an authoritarian regime. Your leader is a former KGB strongman, and you decide to protest the war. I mean, you pretty much know you're going to get arrested and go to jail. This is not like a right to assemble situation.
No, it's not.
And so you have thousands of people willing to risk themselves that way, which means in my mind you have millions of people who feel the same way. There are a number of prominent figures in Russian society who are like, hey, this war is nothing that any of us wants. It really is one malignant person leading them to a war that most people thought was well out of the bounds of possibility. I was just reading that the U.S. was going around to folks being like, hey, FYI, we think that Russia may invade Ukraine, and everyone didn't believe it.
We're only 8 months away from the midterms. What do you think the political consequences are here in the United States, Democrats, Republicans? I have some thoughts too. I have some funny shit to share, but I want yours at first.
I think that this is an opportunity for Biden to refocus his presidency on leadership and competence and morality, and it sharpens the contrast between him and the Republicans in various ways. Now, most Republicans are anti-Putin, supportive of these measures. There are some marginal voices that aren't, but like they're pretty much out there. So it's not like there's a sharp contrast where Biden wants to do one thing and Republicans want to do something else.
Yep.
But I think that this conflict in Biden's leadership probably at least mildly, maybe significantly helpful
Yep.
For his administration and Democrats.
So there's a poll that was circled around a lot, was that most people, both Democrats and Republicans, believe that this situation in Russia would not have happened if Trump was president, and that Putin was essentially implying, which I think was the case, and maybe some people believe this, that Putin's less scared than Biden than he would be of Trump. And doing this, felt that there was less consequences if he acted. I think if Biden, I don't know if Biden,
Well, Trump just voiced approval for this entire course of action, so
he does, yes, but like it wouldn't have happened.
So
not
if
the
anything,
actions
it might
are
have
taken.
been the reverse, where Putin's like, "Hey, Trump's going to be cool with this, so let me do this thing," and then Trump, as president, is like, "Hey, let Russia do Russia."
Perhaps. Like, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not even trying to speculate what Trump would be doing. It was just the poll was like, would this have happened if Trump was president?
So
like
as you can
Putin,
tell,
right?
I'm of the mind that this totally happens.
Oh yeah, I think it would too. I don't think that's inaccurate, but I think that this is like the sentiment, and that's the message that Fox News and the Republican Party has been going with, like our weak president and country and lack of strategy and strength at home is hurting us abroad, and Putin thinks he can do whatever he wants without any consequences, right? And that is changing, and I do think this could change the tide. I think if Biden wants to win in 2024 or the Dems want to win, we have to have a obvious victory here. We have to put Putin in his place. I'm not sure how to do that, and people far smarter than I am, hopefully, working on this. But I think that's the case. The other thing is saying is Dems suck at war. Like, I generally don't think we're great at this, and I don't it's mainly because you have Twitter savvy Dems saying dumb stuff. And I have my favorite one of the dumb things I've heard. I mean, by the way, Twitter is ripe for hot takes right now. If you want to see ridiculous takes, this is a good time for Twitter. But Eric Swalwell, who I like, we kind of had fun with him on the trail. He floated the idea, and I like when people float ideas out there. We float ideas out. But he floated the idea of kicking Russians in the U.S. out of our universities in retaliation to Putin invading Ukraine.
Yeah, that's insane.
And it's that kind of stuff that, like, what do Republicans do? They grab it, they clip it, they play it over and over. And Dems are more likely to say that, as the party who's supposed to be rational, Republicans are always doing dumb shit.
I mean, Russians themselves aren't for this war. Russian Americans,
No.
I'm sure, are against this war.
My favorite Eric Swalwell story was when we were backstage, your first debate, and you show up in the line, like we're all back there, and you show up and you weren't wearing a tie. And he was like, "Oh, you're not wearing a tie? Damn, man, I was gonna do that." And he was like legit jealous and like kind of pissed at himself. I was like, hell yeah. That's my favorite Swalwell story.
Eric's a good dude, and I like Eric.
Yeah.
But, and let me be the first to say that, bad Twitter take does not a human make. So
No, it was, yeah, that's fair.
But
you are aware of that. But this was on camera. He said it.
But I'm sure that, so your earlier point about, like, I made it a comment a couple of podcasts ago about how Dems, I think, feel pressure to be muscular about war because they feel like it's a weak spot. They feel like Republicans
that was my point,
have the hawkish thing, and so
Correct.
Democrats get painted as doves. So they feel like they need to overcompensate somewhat.
Interesting.
The most famous example being Hillary's vote to authorize the Iraq war, and then later being like,
whoops.
and then Obama was like, yeah, that was misjudgment.
Terrible decision, yeah.
So on this one, Biden seems relatively balanced. There is like the hawkish element. What you described is like, look, we should be there fighting. There's a significant amount of me. It's like, look, like this is the most corrupt, unjustified, evil instigation of war against democracy that I can remember. And so if there's anything that you'd be fighting for, like, this would be it. Are Democrats generally painted into a corner? Like, Biden was meant to restore a degree of competent leadership. And I would say that is the projection, where it seems like he's in sync with the European leaders, that they're acting with a united front, that the U.S. has been competent in this. I think it helps them. And I feel like this portrait is vastly superior to a Trump-led portrait in another world where Trump were president right now. We all struggle sometimes, and it's particularly true in the winter. Sometimes you come back out of that funk, but sometimes you need some serious help. I mean, professional help. Now, getting professional help is easier than ever. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy, and I, for one, am super pumped to let people know about what BetterHelp can do for you. BetterHelp is online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Give it a try and see why over 2 million people have used BetterHelp Online Therapy. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Forward listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/yang. That's BetterHelp.com/yang. Get yourself some BetterHelp today. You'll be glad you did.
What are your thoughts on skin of the game and legacy? In the sense, I feel like this drives a lot of international decisions, because it would if I was in those shoes. In the sense, if you're Joe Biden, I don't think this is your career-defining legacy. One, you've been there forever. Two, you were vice president for the first black president in the United States of America. That's probably the biggest legacy you're going to have. And the second one, you're the president that defeated Donald Trump and was institutional sanity, right? I think those legacies will probably outweigh anything that happens with Putin, unless this turns into an all-out World War III situation. That's my gut. I think that's relatively accurate. If you're Trump in this situation,
well, I will put a counterexample out there.
Yeah.
Let's say Putin takes Ukraine, or most of Ukraine or part of Ukraine, and then it emboldens other actors around the world where everyone's like, hey, it turns out I can just start taking
whatever I want. Yeah.
And so if Biden were to preside over a complete collapse of a sane world order, that
might
would
trump the legacy.
Yeah, that would be very, very damaging.
Yes, it would. And then I guess my point was on the flip side. Trump's legacy is Trump. You know what I'm saying? The Trump mindset, the Trump way of speaking, Trump is the Republican Party, right? His drain the swamp kind of
Trump has given rise to Trumpism, which will outlive Trump.
Correct. Yes. So my point was, thoughts on the skin in the game aspect of this. So if you're Trump, this fucks up. This is on your name. This is on you. This is your brand, your persona, Trumpism, essentially on trial and things like this. If you're Biden, you're probably this is an institutional thing. So you're getting advice from a bunch of consultants that don't have any skin in the game and their legacy doesn't matter. You're listening to the institutional brain behind the Democratic Party, who could care less, when push comes to shove, about this shit, as long as their family's safe. Am I being too cynical there? But it was it feels to me Trump would have more skin in the game to it might be in a bad way. It might be more aggressive.
So Russia and Trump have a certain relationship. Here are a couple of things I've heard from the Joe Biden universe. Mm-hmm. One thing I've heard is that Joe Biden does not want to involve the United States militarily.
Our sources on the inside say he's anti.
What's the
word?
Sending American troops, anti-military intervention. That's in this situation, but that's
anti-intervention to a fault. Yes. Or not to a fault.
Just anti-intervention.
Yes.
You could say so. So number one, genuinely anti-intervention. And do other leaders know this? Probably.
If we know it.
Yeah, if we know it.
This is the DC insiders know this. So you got to assume the international leaders know this in some way.
Yeah. The other thing that we're hearing is that Joe Biden wants to run again, but that there are misgivings in the Democratic Party as to whether that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. But obviously, Joe Biden's the single biggest factor in Joe Biden running again. And the fact that Trump may be the Republican nominee is increasing Joe's desire to run, because he feels it's his job to defeat Trump. Mm-hmm. He's done it once. He will do it again.
If he kicks Putin's ass, I think he'll have a really good shot in 2024.
Unfortunately, man, I think if this conflict gets resolved, let's say, early 2022, I think it's a relatively
You're right. It's not
like
enough time.
non-factor by the
You're
time
probably
24 rolls around.
So anyway,
The single biggest factor
yeah.
is going to be what the heck is going on with our economy, which
I
we
was
can
just going
talk
to ask
about
you. We
to
should.
this.
So you would talk about the interest rates and the economy. How does this? That was it. Those are the political consequences. Unclear. Dems will rally around this if they can. Republicans will beat them up on it if they can. What happens to our economy? Interest rates, inflation. What's going to happen?
Well, and I think this is going to play on the midterms, and I'm going to suggest this is probably the most important factor in 24. So what's going on in Ukraine, and this is obviously a secondary concern to the tragic,
lives and
the tragic loss of life and stability, and people, like, over 500,000 people have already been turned into refugees from their own country. So distant second to the human toll, prices are likely going to go up as a result, at least in the short term. Even though sanctions have not been applied directly to the energy sector, which is Russia's biggest export and the rest of it.
Right.
But even the sanctions that have already been put in place will spur increased inflation and
in the U.S. or global, or both here and globally.
Both here and globally. So one of the wilder facets was that, and this is a sign of where we are in America today, is that there was a market rally because the expectations were that interest rates will remain low longer because of instability. So inflation is at multi-year, multi-decade highs. It's imposing a lot of pain on a lot of people.
Yep.
This conflict is going to make it worse. I'm not sure if most people are going to quote unquote blame Biden and Democrats for that, because in this one, any additional inflation, it's like, obviously, this is on Putin, but a lot of Americans just see what they're paying when they buy gas, they go buy groceries.
The economy's not good. It hurts the sitting president every time.
Yeah. There's actually a discussion around Joe's framing. So here's what's happening, and I find this very agitating, is that every president essentially just talks about like how good the economy is. And there are things you can point to right now that suggest it is a good economy. But we
have so many metrics that don't mean anything. You could probably point to
yeah.
anything at any time saying things are good.
But there are a whole lot of Americans who would completely disagree with any positive evaluation of the economy.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to carry through this year. I think it's going to play out in the midterms. And then the question is whether things are hunky-dory by 24. Now the problem for us all, really, is that we've had this extended period of artificially low interest rates that have spurred speculative bubbles and a lot of things. And so there's an investor that said to me, look, like, here's the math, and it's problematic, is that if you have interest rates go up by a certain amount and you owe, whatever it is, 130% of GDP or whatever we owe, then the amount you're paying to service the national debt shoots up to a significant portion of the federal budget. But maybe equally disconcertingly, a lot of the stock market valuations are based upon very, very low interest rates, because you can project out a certain value in X years, and because the interest rate is low, then you can justify a very high valuation. But if the interest rate goes up and you apply that interest rate across multiple years, then this valuation no longer makes sense, and then the valuations have to come down.
It's crazy how interconnected all this stuff is.
Yeah. So the single biggest driver right now of these valuations is what's going to happen with interest rates. There are certain Fed hikes that are priced in. Anything that affects those hikes ends up being like a mini correction in the stock market, like the next day.
We're expecting an interest rate hike to fight inflation. Is that but you're saying how will this affect it?
Yeah, the expectation was that there would be something like 6 quarter point hikes over the next 12 months, and that stuff's more or less priced in. And that's necessary to combat inflation that's at 7.5% annualized or whatnot. So now the tough part is that inflation's going to go up.
You may have to raise the rates even higher.
But strangely enough, the Fed is signaling, or at least the market is expecting the Fed to say, look, we're not going to raise interest rates because we don't want to spook the markets, or like, because of global instability, essentially. So that there is this massive reckoning that's coming down the pike that no one knows how it's going to be resolved, when there are a number of interconnected variables. Number one, the rate of inflation, painfully high. Number two, national debt, much higher than it's been, and is up and up. And then stock market valuations that are reliant upon low interest rates. and then interest rates that have been kept aberrantly low, artificially low. So I've talked to a number of very, very experienced investors, including David Rubenstein on the podcast, where he looked up and said, well, there are only a few ways out of this. And what he joked about, but it was accurate, he said that when he left office under the Carter administration, inflation was at 15%, so no one wants it back. But back then, the national debt was something like 30% of GDP instead of 130%.
Oh, interesting.
So that if you had higher interest rates, it doesn't increase your costs as much. So that there are just a lot of people have looked at this and said, hey, look, like this math doesn't add up. One person who said this to me when I had dinner with him, like a week or so ago, Tom Steyer, who's obviously, hyper experienced investor.
That's
and he looked at this and
yeah.
said, like, hey, like these numbers are going to have to correct in one way or another. And the magnitude of the correction is almost unthinkably vast.
There have been some investment experts who have gone in the press and saying we're headed for a big correction that no one's really fully understood. The logic here is sound. Like, we have a bit of an unsustainable situation going on and geopolitical factors that are driving them the wrong way, right? I will say this: if what you're talking about actually happens, you have a big market correction and that sort of thing, it doesn't matter what happens in Russia or these culture issues. Like, the Dems are toast with a bad economy. It's usually it's the economy stupid or whatever famous adage is.
So this is the great fear, and I unfortunately do sense some parallels.
Yeah.
Is that Joe Biden will be stuck with a Jimmy Carter-esque situation. The issue, so there's a Fed chair, Paul Volcker, under Jimmy Carter, who just turned the screws and said, we're going to whip inflation. It was whip inflation now, win. Everyone distributed win buttons. And the way they whipped inflation was they just freaking turned those interest rates up so high that you had double-digit unemployment and recession. And that got Carter out of office, essentially. He was a one-termer and lost to Reagan.
Yep.
So Joe Biden has inherited a similar situation, but the variables are significantly worse.
Yep. Oy vey.
So if you believe in the laws of economic physics, there would have to be some draconian measures. But if the Fed chair today were to do what Volcker did then, it would be completely unacceptable.
Be awful.
And the damage would be far worse because the debt is so much higher.
Well, hopefully, I don't know, we've had a number of conversations on this podcast in particular, and personally, that economic physics have either been ignored, like they either don't matter anymore, or we've been ignoring them forever and they're going to come home to roost at some point, but unclear when and
how.
Yeah, and how.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. I do think it sounds like the Russia-Ukraine conflict will have various political consequences, whether it's the war itself or the economic impacts. And
so the economic impact, I want to be clear, it's unclear. It's not clear how significant it's going to be, but it's not going to be good. It's going to hurt people. It's going to hurt people at the gas station. It's going to hurt people in their pocketbook.
Yep.
Like that. Like that's very, very certain.
Can Biden do anything to prevent that? And this conflict is.
Well, one thing they just did, as like a tiny example of something you might want to do, is they just released 60 million barrels from the National Oil Reserve.
Got it.
So they're taking
increasing the supply of oil to bring the price down.
They're taking some steps. They're like, all right, let's start.
These are the people I pray for. You know, the theoretically very smart people, the decisions of very few impacting the lives of many.
I have run small businesses and bigger businesses for a couple decades now. And the big lesson is that you have to use your time effectively. You know what's not an effective use of your time? Waiting in the post office. You can do better than that. And with Stamps.com, you can skip that trip and focus on the things your business actually needs to grow. Yep, Stamps.com will let you print postage right from your computer, save you money. More importantly, it will save you time, because time is where it's at. Stop overpaying for shipping with Stamps.com. Sign up with promo code YANG for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, free postage, and a digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. Just go to Stamps.com, click the microphone at the top of the page, and enter code YANG. Give yourself your time back. Never wait in line at a post office again. Stamps.com. Enter code YANG.
And I do think the United States has done I'd argue, a really good job, or a decent job, of like maintaining the money supply and balancing the interest rates since late 80s and 90s, right? I mean, there's some ups and downs, but like
I would disagree, but continue.
Look, we're not Japan, right? Like, you know, like even like as bad as 2008 was, like we got out of it, right? As bad as the late 90s were, we got out of it.
So here is my take on it is that so there are these massive imbalances leading up to 2008. And then 2008, there should have been this reckoning that was absent. And that reckoning should have been political, which it should have been criminal, it should have been civil, and then it should have been economic.
Agree with that. But the excess was too much.
But we live in a time when no one wanted to pay the price. And so they just said, hey, what's that? Like bank, mortgage-backed securities? It's cool. Here are your bonuses. No one go to jail.
Yep.
Hey, what's that? Like, you know, stock market cap problematic? Here's hundreds of billions of dollars. Recap. What's that? You know, you need interest rates to be low to like kind of keep the party going? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done that. I still can't believe that was 14 years ago. And you've essentially had a liquidity fueled like quasi expansion ever since. Like ordinarily you have a recession every 8 years or so. And we're in year 14 of this mega cycle that's fueled by just like massive liquidity. And it's unclear how this ends, but you know, like the David Rubensteins and the Tom Steyers look at this and are like, because they're frankly kind of older. Like, you know, Rubenstein's in the 70s, Tom, you know, is in I don't know, 50s or 60s. So they're like, hey, we've kind of seen this movie, and this is like a mega sized version of that movie. So just because there hasn't been a reckoning yet, it's been building, and even the 2008 stuff was built upon, in my view, like, you know, like not great governance and monetary policy leading up to that.
I mean, awful.
Yeah, awful.
Yeah.
So if you backdate this, like I think we're looking at
like
something that's been,
things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, you know, like the old days when you're like, hey, you can't have an investment bank and a commercial bank in the same roof, and they're like, no, you can do it.
Yeah, that was Clinton. Thank you, Bill.
So they started, right. It was from that era of deregulation. So you're looking at approximately like a 26-year period of excess that's just getting built and is kicking the can down the road. Our politicians have been a huge part of it because they've been like, what? You know, fiscal responsibility, pshaw, like, you know, like Republicans are in power, they're like, cut taxes.
Yeah.
You know, Democrats in power, they were like, well, you know, like, let's add on some new stuff and like not actually look at any of the stuff that currently is going out. So I talk to people, and it's funny because I have a fairly, let's say, you know, ambitious view on like what we can do societally, like which I still hold. But there are a lot of people who are in this investor class who are deeply concerned about the fact that we have this essentially mega bubble that's been building up over not years but decades.
The question is how much of these economic physics you're talking about is what I said before. Have they changed? Are they fundamentally different? And this is like the super money you're talking about, where like, you know what? This is what the Web3 and crypto community argues all the time, is that money, you made it up, right? You're just backing it by the faith in the United States, so we can make our own.
Left the gold standard a long time ago.
Yeah, we can build something that everybody else trusts, which is going to be more trustworthy because it's going to be math and fucking numbers and science and algorithms and transparent. And so, I mean, if that's the argument, then we can probably do no wrong. I don't know. And I guess that's what the investors are like. This doesn't seem like it's adding up. But you know what? They've been saying that for a while. I don't know if that's good or, I mean, it's probably not a good thing, but maybe it's a new normal. I'm probably wrong in that. It's probably just going to blow up my face, and then you'll re-record and clip this podcast back. And say,
no, I mean,
you know what you're talking about. It's true.
Well, you know, I mean, we're living in unprecedented times. And I mean, it's also true that the U.S. has a global reserve currency, and that may suspend the laws of physics in a particular way.
It definitely warps them, right?
Yeah, and there's no real threat to the U.S. dollar supremacy.
And there's no threat militarily. Like, who collects our debts if we default? This is the other piece of this puzzle. I think a lot, like, back in the day, if you owed them money and you don't get it, what does a mob do? They fucking kill you. Like, if you storm the castle, right? Whatever it is, you go to war.
The issue in this case is that, you know, we're like continuously financing based on debt. So even if people were like, hey, I'm going to stop buying your debt, then what do we?
There's micro effects. And my point was like the U.S. defaults, they never will. Or if they, there's.
I mean, heck, we might default for political stupidity.
Yeah, we're definitely at some point we'll default on something. Haven't we done it before? We failed to.
Well, there's the entire debt ceiling.
Yes, we've been
suspension.
The government
shutdowns. By the way, is the
and
stupidest
shit.
thing in the world.
Oh my god, it's just political theater. They're just bored. They're looking for another conflict. This is our world. This is a little depressing. What's getting you excited this week, man?
Well, this week we're celebrating the successful launch of Lobby 3. So that's
Lobby
good
3,
fun.
man. For those of you who don't care about crypto, we're sorry for plugging it, but I do think it is a very worthwhile endeavor.
It's a very wholesome endeavor.
Yes.
I mean, we're trying to take some of the resources that have been generated over this past period of time and improve people's lives in the real world, and then make it the case that we should be doing more of this. And by the way, you know, this can help a lot of people in different contexts. I'm super excited about some of the things going on with the Forward Party. We have some great stuff in the pipe. So that makes me happy all the time. I will say first, thank you to everyone who listens and supports generally. Extra thank you to folks who decided to support Forward, because October we launch, and you know, I'm like a fairly confident, resolute guy, so I'm like, all right, let's do this thing.
Okay.
But there is like a significant part of you that's like, oh, I hope
this goes well.
I hope people are excited about it and can see it.
Yeah.
And understand the need. And so the fact that now the Forward Party is this thriving organization with volunteers in states around the country, and you know, financial resources to be able to actually operate and all these things. I mean, it's really special and wonderful, and I'm so grateful. And so if you're listening to this and you're like a donor, a supporter, or volunteer, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because we have a very important case to make to the American people in the world about what the future can be. More people are waking up every day to the fact that this system as it stands is totally dysfunctional and polarizing, and the answer is not going to come from within. We
were doing a Twitter Spaces on, or maybe it was in our Discord on Lobby 3, and someone said something really interesting. He said, well, Andrew, I love what you're doing, but like I'm worried that you're going to distract from Forward, or I don't want you to, I hope you haven't given up on Forward. And to me, my takeaway is like, I wanted to clarify this, but Forward, if it's successful, has to be bigger than you. It can't be an Andrew Yang thing. It has to be a thriving
and it's heading in that direction,
and it's going that way, and that's the point. And I think it either has to do one of two things. It needs to become a effective competitive third party option, which I think that's where it's headed, and they're not mutually exclusive. But the second one, it needs to trailblaze for other parties to get started as well, where I think you then start about a more dynamic diverse democracy.
Yeah,
right?
well, in order for new entrants to emerge, you have to change the mechanics. But I agree with
Correct.
you that
You're kind of cutting
what we're
against the
doing
mechanics.
with Lobby 3 and the Forward Party very much are complementary, mutually beneficial. I mean, some of the people that have been most excited about Forward Party have actually been like folks from the Web3 community.
Oh yeah, there's alignment for sure.
Yeah, there's
the
alignment.
principles are very aligned.
And then if
the principles align on anything you've done. I don't like the core hasn't changed much. I mean, the press will freak out about everything else, but
yeah, it's so I'm super pumped about
yeah,
how things are going, and you know I don't take it for granted for 1 second. I mean, it really is remarkable. So when Forward launched in October, like I hit the trail, was doing book events around the country. You know, one of those is now available on forwardparty.com that you can just watch the video if you make a small donation. During that time, I was hopeful that it's like, okay, hopefully people see what I'm doing and we'll get behind it. And now we are, you know, what, 4 months later or something like that, and like the ground's already firm beneath our feet. Like it's awesome, and we're just going to keep on growing.
It's a Herculean task. So that does make me excited. Last thing that makes me excited, Batman comes out this weekend. God, I hope it's good. I hope it's good, man. Robert Pattinson, don't let me down.
Are you a fan of his from Twilight or Harry Potter? Or something else? Because he's done a lot of indie stuff.
I loved him in, what's the movie where he's like getting chased? I can't remember it, but he's like in the streets. Like he's got like, it's like a gun violence, street violence movie. He's really good. It's called like Running something.
It's called Good Time.
Thank you. I'm a fan. I love that movie, Good Time. I actually thought he was great in that. And then he's also, James is going to know this one too. He's also in a movie, I think with William Dafoe in black and white called The Lighthouse.
That's right.
Yep. Nailed it. Our producer's like very, movie buff sounds like more lame. He just like knows a lot about movies and directors and things like that. So thank you, James. He's got a wide range of talent, in my opinion. And we did not meet him, but we shared like a waiting room with him on the presidential, because he was on NPR at the same time you were. We didn't recognize him until he was like leaving. We're like, that was
Batman.
Fucking Twilight.
That was Bruce Wayne.
We didn't say Batman. He was Batman.
Get him.
That was Edward Cullen. That's his name from Twilight.
It was Bruce Wayne.
I hope he's good. I think he's a talented actor. I hope the movie's good, because Christopher Nolan's still my favorite director. And so I've been waiting for someone to do Batman well again. And so I hope this is a crack at it. The critics somewhat like it. Daily Mail ripped it apart. TBD.
I'm optimistic. I like Matt Reeves' work. I think Pattinson is a very talented actor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the last big movie was Spider-Man No Way Home,
which was awesome.
Which was awesome.
This is a different theme.
It's very, very different vibe. At the end, all three Batmen show up. No, I'm kidding.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, shit.
Just kidding. No, it's your time by now.
It's probably like 5 Batmen. Hang on. Let's count them up.
If you had Ben Affleck, Christian Bale, who was before that? I remember the old ones
Val Kilmer.
But Val Kilmer, George Clooney.
And Keaton.
Michael Keaton.
It's 5. So people are totally going to omit Clooney from this list because he only showed up once. And
he only did it once.
That did not do well.
You know what would be cool? The villains were still great, though. Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze and Danny DeVito as Penguin. Like, come on. Jim Carrey as the Riddler. Like, I'm not saying the movies were that great, but just like the vibe cast I thought was pretty cool. Jack Nicholson as the Joker. Like, come on. These are like very iconic castings. But it was a different type of movie. It was a little more comic booky, if you will. James is our producer, is listening to this, probably like rolling he wants to throw up in his mouth about our ineffective movie takes. But you know, you're all here for it. If you're still listening, we love you for listening to that.
Take care of yourself out there. To the extent that the news is getting to you mentally, feel free to take a break from it. Feel free to, just take a walk outside. Just remember to control the things you can control, do the things you can do. Don't imagine that the weight of the world is on your shoulders, because the most important thing you can do is feel good. Take care of yourself. That's going to make you more able to take care of the people around you and do the things that you need to do.
We're back Monday, and then with Ramesh and Andrew and I back on Thursday. See you then.